This is Dashuan Feng. We're here for the remembrance of Yang Fujia, our friend. We will go through the list of speakers that we have. At the end, there will be time for people who wanted to make comments that is not in the list. If you do want to make it, please use the button at the end saying that, with a chat, saying that you want to make a comment, and we will identify you, and you can say a few words. Is that acceptable to everyone?
Sure.
Okay.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Okay, so why don't we begin now with with Dr. Sun Yongyan, who is the son-in-law of Fujia. Please show his PowerPoint.
It's still not my PowerPoint yet.
Oops. Hang on.
Did you find his PowerPoint, Don?
Yeah, I'm having some computer issues here at the moment. Trying to get it back to the screen here for you. When I go full screen, it goes crazy on me.
Well, show whatever you can.
Okay, here we go.
Yep.
You seeing that?
Only
Yes.
partially. Oh, okay. Okay. Can you remove the thing on the end? Okay, that's good. You cannot show the full screen, huh?
When I go full screen, it whacks out my my settings.
All right. Okay. Okay, let's go.
So,
Yongyan?
okay, yeah.
Go ahead.
I got. Okay. So, dear friends and family, thank you for joining us in celebrating Fujia Yang's life at this memorial drawing session. My father-in-law Fujia passed away last year on July 17, 2022. We mourn his loss and miss him dearly. So here shows multiple sites has remembering activities at Shanghai. Ningbo,
Next slide. Next slide.
Yeah, next slide.
Oh, sorry.
So Fujia was a great contributor to the development of physical science, a renowned educator, an excellent friend, and loving husband, father, and grandfather. Here
Next
shows
slide.
he with his family. So after Fujia trained at Niels Bohr Institute at Copenhagen, Denmark, he established China's first research map on ion beam analysis.
Let me add a few words here. Those pictures are Fujia at the Niels Bohr Institute when he was 28 years old in Copenhagen.
Okay, so he authored a textbook on nuclear physics, which is still widely used in colleges. He made a significant impact on the development of science and education in his roles as an academician of the Chinese Academy of Science, a former president of Fudan University, and a former chancellor of University of Nottingham. He insists on high quality of teaching, advocating for interest-based, self-driven learning to ignite the flame in students' heart. He also constantly pursues of excellency, promoting innovation.
Next slide. Next slide.
So we would like to deeply thank Professor Hampton and Feng, who organized this session. Both of them are longtime friends dating back to 1970s. Here is a description of both Professor Hampton and Professor Feng. Professor Feng met Fujia in Copenhagen in 1917, and their friendship has only grown stronger over time. Now I will turn over the meeting to Professor Feng.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Sun, for this.
Thank you. I really appreciate all this effort.
Very nice introduction. We now have Dr. Christine Agnew, who is the provost of Warwick University. Sure, I have two rows today. The first one is that she will read the comment from Sir David Grenaway, the former Vice Chancellor of Nottingham University. Sir David was the key individual from Nottingham who had the vision of appointing Fujia as not just the first Chinese as Nottingham University's Chancellor, but to this date, only one in British universities, which as you all know, Britain has had almost more than 1,000 years of history of higher education. So, Christine, you need to show Christine's PowerPoint.
I will simply speak, Daswan.
Oh, okay, sorry.
And it's a real honor to have the opportunity to speak on behalf of Sir David. And I know his words would also be shared by Fujia's dear friend, the late Sir Colin Campbell, who was David's predecessor and who was also very close to young Fujia in his work with Nottingham, UK and Ningbo. But the words that Sir David wanted to share with everyone today are as follows. And he said, "There are few who can claim to have transcended international boundaries in the way that Yang Fujia did. As a researcher, as an educator, as an influencer, and as an innovator." And of course, at the University of Nottingham, he made a unique contribution, both as Chancellor of the University, but also as inaugural President of the University of Nottingham, Ningbo, China. He was the first from China to hold the office of Chancellor at a British university, the first to lead a Sino-British university. And alongside all of those tremendous professional achievements, I think one of the things that Sir David really wanted to highlight was the way in which Fujia made an indelible impact on Nottingham, but also became a good friend, such a good friend of so many of us, including Sir David, and he will be sorely missed. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those touching words. We now go to the next person.
Get up, Sharon West.
Yes, and Joe will read the comment of Vice Chancellor West. Vice Chancellor wrote to me saying that she regrets very much for not being here personally because she is attending the graduation ceremony as the Vice Chancellor, which one of the few things as Vice Chancellor, she cannot not be there. So here it is, Joe.
Yes. Okay. Thank you very much, Professor West. We're delighted to have you join us. We can move to the next one. Next slide. Professor Yang Fujia will remain fondly and proudly in our memories as a leader of immense vision and drive. So much of the University of Nottingham we know today would not be here without his influence as our sixth chancellor. A leading advocate of a global approach to education, Professor Yang was the first Chinese academic to be appointed chancellor of a British university. He was a true champion of educational reform in China, but in pursuing this vision, he helped to lay the foundation for change in the UK, starting with the University of Nottingham and leaving a legacy of opportunity for so many students around the world. His achievement and his name will resonate long into our futures, both in the UK and in Ningbo. He once said, "I was fortunate enough to be the Chancellor of the University of Nottingham for 12 years. I visited countless universities around the world and gradually understood what liberal arts education is. Naturally, I'm also thinking about whether this excellent teaching system can be migrated to China." Fujia was an exemplar of values we hold dear, building bridges between the UK and China. His support for the first Sino-foreign university, the first of its kind, nearly 20 years ago, demonstrated his vision and foresight. His contribution over the years has led to the outstanding reputation and success of University of Nottingham, Ningbo, China today. As the first president of UNNC, he will always be remembered for his focus on academic quality and his interest in supporting young talents. He once said, "Oh, we've gone the wrong direction. That was the one before." No, we just did that one. Next one.
That's the next one.
That's the next one. Okay, once said, "I was fortunate enough to be the Chancellor of the University of Nottingham for 12 years and visited countless universities around the world and gradually understood what liberal arts education is. Naturally, I'm also thinking about whether this excellent teaching system can be migrated to China." Next one. Okay,
Next
that's
one.
the building in Nottingham.
Named after Fujia.
Yes, named for Fujia. Okay, the next one. In December 2012, University of Nottingham paid tribute to the outgoing Chancellor's contribution by renaming the Jubilee Campus's International House in his honor. The Yang Fujia building will remind generations of students to come of the man who upheld excellence in education, provided opportunities for young people, and helped enhance the university as a global institution. Is that the last one?
That's the last one.
Okay.
Thank you. Next, we have Dr. Nick Miles, who is now the Provost and Pro-Vice Chancellor of the University of Nottingham, Ningbo, China. Nick?
Thanks, Taswa.
You don't have a PowerPoint, right?
There's three slides. If you could put the middle slide up, the second slide, the one.
Okay, okay.
That's
good.
Great. That's lovely. Thank you. So it's a great honor to speak on behalf of the University of Nottingham, Ningbo, China, and pay respects to Professor Yang Fujia on this occasion of the 1-year anniversary of his passing. Fujia spent his entire life exploring and practicing educational philosophy that he believed was the best for cultivating talent. He was committed to the idea that a university should inspire students and broaden their horizons. You know, he once said education is not about being a passive learner, but sparking an inner flame and unlocking potential. Advocating a student-centered approach to education, he believed that every student was remarkable in their own way and that each student should be given the opportunity to find their own path. They should be, and he also said they should be exposed to quality teaching and have the chance to interact with all the staff in a university, to be curious, ask questions, debate, discuss their ideas, not just with the teachers and fellow students, but even challenge their professors. So Fujia's philosophy shaped the characteristics of our university, UNNC, and our students. We've had more than 20,000 students have embraced his vision and graduated from UNNC. He was as proud of our students as they are of him. From time to time, he received letters from students saying UNNC has changed their lives, which absolutely delighted him. UNNC is living proof of what he advocated, that universities should be judged by the life-changing experience they offer the students. Here at UNNC, we've also named a building after President Yang. And the image you see on your screen now is a teaching building located in the center of the campus, teaching campus area. And the flowers you see there were put down last weekend when we celebrated our graduations of class 2023. Many students and parents and family members laid flowers at the tablet of the young Fujia building, which I think speaks volumes of how people held him in great respect. Although we grieve the loss of President Yang, we take comfort in his legacy, knowing that his vision will continue to inspire generations of students who have yet to pass through the gates of UNNC. Human beings first, professional second, will always be the most popular motto which our students proudly quote to demonstrate their spirit and integrity as a UNNCer. He will always remain in our memories. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those incredible words about Fujia. Next, we have actually up to now, you heard from Christine, from Vice Chancellor West, and from Nick, all about Fujia and his UK experiences. Well, actually, he has the other half, which is in China. The next person to speak is Professor Hao Shen, who is the professor at the Institute of Modern Physics, Fudan University. And I believe, and Professor Hao Shen can correct me if I'm wrong, that this institute was actually founded by Yang Fujia. Maybe I'm wrong, but let's have Dr. Hao Shen. Hello? Well, she did say that she might have reached a Wi-Fi problem since she's in a remote area in Japan at the moment. If we don't get her in the next 5 seconds, we'll go on to the next one. Are you there, Dr. Hao Shen? Okay. Well, the next one is a comment by Joseph Hamilton, Landon C. Garland Distinguished Professor of Physics, Vanderbilt University. He just retired from Vanderbilt after 61 years. Is that right, Joe?
64.
64 years at the university, but he looks like he's only 64. So you can figure out this guy is just incredible. All right, Joe, the screen is yours.
Remembrance of two old friends of a great Chinese intellect, Academician Fujia Yang. I want to add first, as I start, Professor Yang, people have said much about his educational endeavors, and that's proper and amazing. But what I want to emphasize is that Yang Fujia was the leading Chinese scientist who opened the doors of China to Western physicists beginning in 1978. Later that year, he was a member of the first Chinese physics delegation to visit the United States, including Vanderbilt. Professor Yang and I began communication when he wrote me and asked me for an email. See what the next slide shows. In 1973, I wrote this paper in Physics Today entitled Heavy Ions Looking Ahead. Professor Yang wrote me and asked me for a copy of this paper. I sent it to him and suggested we should get together to talk about his work. His reply was, of course, this is not a good time in China for somebody to be talking with an outside individual. So it wasn't until after 1976, when the Gang of Four disappeared, that things began to open up, and Professor Yang invited me to come to China in 1978 and to give a series of lectures to the Chinese physicists and students. The next slide. I came to China. It wasn't easy to get there in 1978. I flew to Hong Kong, took the train to the border, and took the border to the first major city in China. As I walked across that bridge into China for the first time, I thought to myself, Hamilton, what in the heck are you doing here this time in history? In any case, those are my two first views of China. One, the rice paddies, and then I went to the city that was near the Li River. This is a picture of the Li River with the famous upside down cone-shaped mountains. And you can see a man floating on the Li River there. It was a very exciting and interesting time. The next slide. Professor Yang arranged for me to meet with the head of China International Travel. They were just opening up to foreign visitors, and the man sitting next to me in the photograph is the head of China International Travel, and he arranged all of my visits. And it was really a red carpet time because I was the first American to visit many of the places which he arranged for me to see. And when I say red carpet, there were often times when I got off the plane, there was a red carpet laid out in front of the plane for me to walk out on. Next slide. Yang arranged for me to attend the state dinner given by the Premier of China for the visiting Premier of Nepal, and also for the 29th celebration of the founding of the People's Republic of China. Those are the two pictures that I took on those occasions. The one celebration on the founding of the People's Republic of China, to see all the acrobats and gymnasts perform was just unreal. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. And if you've ever seen a Chinese acrobatic show, you will know what I mean. The next slide. Now, the important part to understand is when I went to China in 1978, there had not been a single paper in a Chinese journal by anybody from, at least in physics journals, I don't know about others, but I know, no, I don't want that one. Oops, that's okay. In any case, there had not been a single paper published by anybody in China from the West. By the same token, Chinese scientists were not even publishing themselves in the Chinese journals, and they certainly weren't sending any papers to the Western journals. And the reason being simply was that they had been taught that to publish brought attention to your name, while in fact, what they wanted to do was to build up the image of China. So in my coming to China, it began a series of opening up of Chinese scientists to the West in a way that just transformed Chinese science. And Yang Fujia is the person who initiated that. The next slide. At the Institute of Modern Physics in Lanzhou, I lectured for 3.5 days, 8 hours a day. They published my lectures in this 50-page booklet with figures, and they used it for the next 20 years to help train graduate students. The next director of that, past C.C. Yang, told me that those booklets helped transform science at Lanzhou. Next slide. I asked C.C. Yang, who was also instrumental in helping to open up Chinese science to the West and West to China, if they would like to publish in one of their Chinese journals an article from the West. C.C. Yang told me, send us one and we will see. Here is the first publication in the Chinese journal from the West since 1949. It's an article by myself, my colleague from Oak Ridge National Laboratory, and my colleague from Vanderbilt University. That was a very important paper involving our discovery of shape coexistence in the A = 60 to 80 region. Next slide. I went back again in 1981 and spent 3 weeks and again gave extensive lectures in Lanzhou. And here is their 74-page booklet of my lectures, which again was used to train graduate students for many years in China, and also to train young scientists in China. Next slide. Likewise, at my request in 1979, they sent 2 of their young scientists to work with me for 8 months. These were the first nuclear physicists in China to come to the US, and here are 2 papers, one in Physical Review and one in the Chinese journal that we published on the work that the 2 young Chinese scientists from Lanzhou worked with me on. Next slide.
Sorry.
Okay, they were always gracious hosts to me. Yang Fujia sent me all over to China. This is my picture at Jiayuguan Pass at the end of the Great Wall of China. And he also sent me on when I was in Lanzhou to go to Dunhuang in the desert where the monks had carved their Mona Lisa, which is shown here in the picture on the right. These were enormous sand dunes, and I climbed to the top of a 1,000-foot high sand dune to see a famous lake on the other side of that sand dune. That's my guide who finally gave up. He didn't make it to the top with me. Next slide. This is my guide from Fudan University who went with me everywhere I went on my first 3 trips to China. Here we are in Tibet. As I said, Yang Fujia arranged my trips to include seeing almost everything from China, from Tibet to the Gobi Desert in the north. Next slide. This is the Great Wall of China. It's not many people understand that that Great Wall goes over the tops of mountains. This is on my 65th birthday that I've climbed to the top of the Great Wall of China. And these are 2 of the Chinese scientists. The scientist on the right-hand side of that picture subsequently went to join Argonne National Lab and spent the rest of his career working at Argonne. Next slide. On my 3rd trip to China, Professor Yang, I took with me my daughter and her friend to keep her company. We went to see all sorts, they went to see all sorts of things, such as the Leaning Tower, if you will, of Pisa of China, which has a greater lean than the Leaning Tower of Pisa in Italy has, as seen on the left. But the thing that was most important, and to show Yang Fuchia's power and influence in China, I wanted my daughter to see the double-sided silk paintings and other sites. Double-sided silk paintings are done in a city about 50 miles from Shanghai. And he said, we will go out on Sunday to see all of those things. And so they took us out, and this is a worker working on a picture of a dog. The silk paintings, that's the silk threads that she is working into that to make that painting. When we got back to Shanghai, my guide, the one picture I showed earlier, said to me, you understand, that factory was not open on Sunday. Yang Fuchia got the director and all of his workers to come out on Sunday afternoon to show your daughter that, that factory for making the double-sided silk paintings. I've told some of my colleagues in business here in Nashville, can you think about me telling you, I want you to have all your workers out on the factory on Sunday afternoon to show the daughter of a good friend of mine your work? Nope, it wouldn't happen in the US, but Yang Fuchia could do it in China. Next slide. He also sent me to Tibet. That's the Potala Palace in Lhasa. Also, while we were in Tibet, I asked to go up to see the Namso Lake, which is at about 15 or 16,000 feet. At the Namso Lake, they mine salt around the edge of the lake as the lake dries up, and this is a yak salt train going through the snow, going back down from Namso Lake. Next slide. He also arranged for me with the director of the China Institute of Atomic Energy and their Reactor Institute. This is the director and myself discussing science and what the Institute could and could not do. He sent me 2 of his younger scientists to work for a year with me in Vanderbilt as part of the exchanges with us. This is a picture with me through a young professor from Tsinghua University, the person who's sitting second from the left in this picture next to me. He came to work at Vanderbilt for a year in 1988, and this opened up a collaboration with Tsinghua that has led to more than 300 scientific papers with Tsinghua, Vanderbilt, and Russia, all 3 universities and institutes working together in a way that nobody else would have believed possible. This is my birthday celebration on my 65th anniversary in China, having gone to the top of the Great Wall of China. Next slide. Yang Fuchia got me appointed as an honorary advisor professor at Fudan University by President Xi in 1988. This is her and Yang Fujia on the left, and President Xi in the middle, and my responding to the appointment as an honorary professor at Fudan. We, through Yang Fujia, arranged for students at Fudan University to have a cooperative program with Vanderbilt, and my other colleague at Tsinghua University arranged a similar program in which the students would take all of their classes at Fudan and Shanghai and would come to Vanderbilt to do their PhD thesis work with me and get a Vanderbilt PhD. I recall when I first proposed this exchange program with Fudan and Tsinghua, my associate dean said to me, "How do we know that those classes are good, that they take in China, meet our standards?" And I said, "Well, we will send them our written qualifying exams. They will take those exams, and if they pass them, we will admit them to the PhD work at Vanderbilt." The first student was a young lady who took that qualifying exam and sent them back to us. There were 15 Vanderbilt students who took that from America. Their average score was 75. Her average score on the 5 written exams was 97. Nobody ever said another word about the quality of the graduate students. 10 students came from those 2 institutions to do their PhD with me under that exchange program. Next slide. Yang Fujia gave an invited lecture in 1992 at the International Conference for my 60th birthday. On the far right is my wife. Next to her is Yang Fujia and his wife and me, and then 2 of my former graduate students and their wives. And this is Professor Yang Fujia's paper in which he talked about the development of atomic weapons and atomic power in China. Next slide. Yang and his wife and Dashwan Feng at the 1992 conference on my 60th birthday. Next slide. Professor Yang knew a lot about political activities, and he arranged for the 2 of us to go to Washington, D.C., at least on 2 different occasions, to 2 different presidents' prayer breakfasts, and to go to a special breakfast for the visiting premier of China in the 1990s. We had a lot of associations politically. Next slide. In a unique collaboration of China and the US, we co-authored the textbook in 2010. I apologize. I thought he had shifted that, Dashwan, at your suggestion to put that further up, and we did it yesterday, but somehow this came back to the original one. We shifted that to be number 4. But Yang Fujia and I wrote a textbook on modern atomic and nuclear physics for graduate students for a 2-semester course in atomic and nuclear and particle physics. And this was published first in 1995, and then the second edition in 2010. 2010 edition with the Institute said this was their all-time best-selling textbook that they published from World Scientific. The next slide. Okay. This is about the authors that was in that textbook. Next slide. My view of Shanghai at dinner. On my last night, the first trip to Shanghai in 1978, the man who arranged all political visits to China, Yang Fujia, got him to invite me to dinner to discuss my trip to China in 1978. This is a view of the Shanghai harbor at the dinner that night. By the way, that park, which you see there in the picture, at one point had a sign in it that said, "No Chinese or dogs allowed in the park." Next slide. The last night in Shanghai in 1978, the dinner hosted by the head of the organizations that arranged all political visits to China, like President Nixon's visit. After dinner, he said the following: "I called Lanzhou to see if you did them any good. They gave you high praise for your lectures, But you and I know that that was not the most important reason for being in China today. The most important reason is that people who get to know each other can learn to live together in peace. Next slide. Professor Yang's vision of scientific cooperation with the West helped significantly transform science in China and in the West. He is owed a deep gratitude for his vision and accomplishments in opening Chinese science to the West. As a final note, in 1979, I wrote an article for Physics Today predicting where Chinese science would be by the year 2000, based on my experiences in 1978. It was rejected because it said it was too Pollyanna. There wasn't any possibility that Chinese science would accomplish what I predicted for them by the year 2000. In 2000, I sat on the board of directors for Physics Today, and I told the director, not only did my predictions come true, they far exceeded my predictions by the year 2000, because once you open a sleeping giant, there's no way to stop it. And Yang Fujia was the person most responsible for getting scientific cooperation with the West and expanding scientific science, at least in physics, in China and in the West. Thank you very much.
Magnificent, Joe. Really magnificent. Next, we have Professor Len Feldman, who is the Distinguished Professor Emeritus of Material Science and Engineering from Rutgers University. Let me say a few words about Len. I've known Len a long, long time, since I was an undergraduate. In fact, we both graduated from the same undergraduate school, somewhere in the middle of New Jersey. Len was 4 years ahead of me. When I got there, Len was already graduated and went on to Rutgers University for his graduate school, and eventually became a powerhouse in material science at one of the world's most advanced research centers called Bell Laboratories. When Bell Laboratories closed its door, so to speak, he was immediately sucked up by Vanderbilt University for a few years, and after that, he came back to Rutgers University, where he did his PhD, where he is now an emeritus professor, distinguished emeritus professor. Len, your area of research has overlapped quite a bit with Fujia, and that's one of the reasons, besides the many other reasons, why we would love to hear from you today.
Good. Thank you, Dashman. So this is my first PowerPoint. Is it possible to go to full screen? But it's not critical.
No.
Okay, very good. So I have a very short contribution, but I wanted to give an example of Professor Yang's insights in recognizing new directions and then being able to build a community, an international community in many cases, in and around that, in bringing together Chinese scientists, Western scientists from all over the world. So let me give you a background. It's only a couple of PowerPoints that I have, but I wanted to just make the comment that it was in the mid-1970s that many people, particularly in the fields of nuclear physics and radiation physics, understood that the techniques of nuclear techniques would be valuable for the fields of condensed matter physics, solid state science, and in fact, electronics. And in particular, recognizing that these techniques were important for silicon in the mid-1970s, when silicon was moving forward by leaps and bounds, was a driving force. Professor Yang recognized that very early, and he organized this symposium. Oh, first of all, I should say the field became known as ion beam analysis, IBA. And I'll let Dashwan tell you that there are many other definitions for IBA that nuclear physicists use. But nevertheless, ion beams became, which are a tool of nuclear physicists, became a tool for condensed matter. So Professor Yang was a strong supporter of this field of ion beam analysis, a little bit out of the mainstream. And as early as 1982, as Joe indicated, this was a time when it was not so many Western visitors. He organized a symposium with basically a small number of Chinese and a group of us who were visiting. I don't know if you will recognize, but of course to the right is a young Professor Yang. And in the center is Professor Jens Linhard, who led the delegation. Linhard is famous for something called the dielectric function, which is used in condensed matter physics and used in radiation physics and used in all sorts of nuclear physics. So we were at this small group. It was in Wangshan Mountains, and there was a symposium of a few days, and Professor Linhard, we were treated extraordinarily well, and Professor Linhard pretty much led the Western delegation. And it was, again, Professor Yang's insight to bring a group led by Professor Linhard and a group of us who were in the field to interact with, in this case, with a small group of Chinese scientists. Now, Professor Yang continued his involvement in this field in a very strong way. And here in 1982, we had a group of about 20. The next PowerPoint shows what that grew into by the year 2017. So Professor Yang's insight indeed turned out to be correct. The field grew from a 20-person workshop in 1982 to this enormous conference that had hundreds of people. And you can see in the lower right a snapshot of Professor Yang, who was the chairman of this conference and organized a wonderful event. So that's really the one point I wish to stress about Professor Yang's career and insight that I certainly have, in fact, I have benefited from, but I think the entire community of those of us who are in this field that merges nuclear physics and material science have benefited from. It was his encouragement, his development, his willingness to host major conferences, and his commitment to bring together the Western and Chinese scientists in this field. So I was very pleased that Dan Xuan asked me to make a contribution. It's a short contribution, but I think it's a very specific example of how Professor Yang operated and how he built communities in and around different aspects of science. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Len, for basically complementing what Joe has said in a real specific example of how Yang Fujia bring in international scientific communities to work together. Before we go to the next one, which on my schedule is Christine, Dr. Haoshan said she finally got on. So perhaps, Christine, you would allow me to ask Dr. Haoshan to say her comments. Dr. Shan?
Yes, yeah, I'm here. So finally I can go to the online. So dear Professor Feng and dear Professor Feldman and Helmut. So first of all, I'd like to express my appreciation for all your efforts to organize this session. I know it takes quite a long time. So I'm also greatly honored to give a small speech here. So we all know that 1 year before, our beloved and respected Professor Fujia Yang left us forever. However, Professor Yang's lead spread insight and also out and outside of our campus. So especially, he always says the pursuit of excellence. So, and also the education concepts of light, fire from a young person's heart have always inspired us to move forward. So now I'm also greatly touched by everyone mentioned or missed him so much. But now may I introduce what our institute have done during this year to commemorate Professor Fujia. So first, we had set up called the Fujia Forum. So it aims to build a high-end academic exchange platform, so docking the international scientific frontier. And actually on March, the first lecture of the Fujia Forum was held. So the speaker is Professor Zhou Bingsong, the academician of the Chinese Academy of Science. So the topic is on the hadron structures. So we think the cooperation spread knowledge to everywhere. So it's also this forum to encourage such kind of the international exchange and cooperation. So I think now it will become more easier for this one. So that's the first thing I'd like to introduce. And another is, the second is set up a Young Fujia Education Fund. So this is with the support of the Kaipu company. So, and also the people is also from this company and is actually is a very good friend of Professor Fujia Yang, and also from the financial support also from our alumni. And it also the aims to fund the outstanding young scholars, so stimulate their vitality of innovation in nuclear science. So besides establishing Fujia Forum and Fund, so in June this year, the third issue of volume 60 of Fudan Journal, we call this the Natural Science Edition, compile a special topics, so recording Professor Fujia Yang's outstanding achievement in the research field of nuclear science. So Professor Fong, if you like this copy, I'd like to send it to you. So, and finally, I would like to say, so the sage will wither and the posterity will follow. So the inheritance is the best memory to Professor Fujia Yang. So we all of us missed him very much. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shen. You know, Fujia's life was Fudan University. Although he's been to Nottingham, he's been to Nielsborg Institute, but you can almost tell in the end he always returned to Fudan University. And Fudan University was Fujia Yang, and Yang Fujia was Fudan University. It's hard to even take them apart. Anyway.
Yes, you. Yeah.
Yeah. The next person is Professor Eng Yu, who is currently the provost of Warwick University in Great Britain. I met Christine more than 10 years ago, I think. One time, you and I shared a platform of a conference in Jakarta, where you came and I was asked to speak and you were asked to speak. Anyway, it is so good to see you and to hear from you. Please.
Thank you, Deswan. Thank you, Joseph. Thank you both for organising this. It's such a positive thing to have the opportunity to come together and to think about and to remember Fujia. Everyone said so much about Fujia as an educational leader. And I don't want to repeat that, but I would just want to endorse everything I've heard. I'd also like to perhaps just briefly reflect on Fujia as a great guide, as a mentor, and as a friend. I only knew him for the last 20 years of his life. I've visited him in Suling, in Shanghai, and Ningbo on many occasions. And I was also honoured to be able to host him when I was living and working in Nottingham. And I think I'm one of many who has benefited from his vision, from his philosophy of higher education. So you've heard about the many students, the many colleagues that he inspired through that genuine commitment to openness, through that willingness to engage. And of course, you don't need to have been a student or a colleague to have benefited from Fujia's wisdom and from his commitment and his willingness to balance, challenge, and respect, from his belief in the importance of liberal education. And at a personal level, I have a very, very strong memory of his genuine commitment to support me in my many roles, his willingness to help me, to expose me to new ideas, to help me to learn from my mistakes, but perhaps most importantly, his ability and his willingness to help me and others to be the best that we could be. And so ultimately what I'm going to remember after everything I've heard today and after the past 20 years is a very dear friend with an infectious enthusiasm, with an absolute love for life, and with an ability to inspire others. Fujia, we miss you, but we were all, I think, hugely privileged to know you and to work with you. And it's been an absolute pleasure to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christine, for those words. I'm sure it touched the hearts of everyone here today and resonate with you too, regarding the way Fujia's life was like. The next, we have a somewhat unusual invitee today. Her name is Olivia Chang. I will let her tell you why she is associated with Fujia. Olivia?
Yes, well, thank you, Dashwan. And hello, everyone. My name is Olivia Chang. I am the CEO of Aurora Technology and Healthcare Company in Boston. I am truly grateful to be given the chance to express our gratification to Professor Yang by Dashwan. Next. It really all started with science, and then everything else kind of continued to follow. So Aurora is a small, next page, thank you. Aurora is a small Boston-based medical technology company focusing on MRI development and clinical application for breast cancer. MRI was, as you know, invented in the late 70s, and the two scientists, Professors Paul Lauterbur and Peter Mansfield, which is from Nottingham, were awarded the Nobel Prize in 2003, attributed to their contribution in MRI invention. So Aurora's Chief Technology and Medical Officer, Dr. Stephen Harms, was a protege of Professor Lauterbur. Next slide. So Professor Feng is the chairman of Aurora's Scientific Advisory Board. And thanks to him, we were introduced to Fujia in 2007, when Fujia came to Boston for a conference at Harvard. He took the opportunity to visit our factory in North Andover, Massachusetts. And during the visit, I remember, he asked a ton of questions in science and medicine about hardware, software, sequences, imaging processing, radio frequency, computer-aided diagnosis, which is called AI today, and so on and so forth. Now, apparently, Fujia liked what he saw in us, and agreed with the vision and mission we were undertaking. So without saying anything at that time, I think he decided to help us. Next. So Fujia is not only a man of wisdom, he is also a man of action. So once he decided, I think he would take on steps to act. Next. He led and held a scientific conference and invited Dr. Harms to present Aurora's breast MRI invention. Next. He encouraged by mentioning our company in China's widely read newspapers that a small company like Aurora could still make a difference. We were just about 100 people at that time, and we were clearly an underdog in the industry for our competitors, our world giants like GE, Siemens, and Philips. Next, and through his guidance and help, Aurora's technology and clinical services sowed the good seed on the rich land of China and opened up possibility for its further application in other regions of the world, so we could save more lives and women fearful of having breast cancer. Next. So our friendship with Fujia and with Mrs. Yang, Peng Laoshi, further grew through many exchange of visits between US and China. Next. When Fujia and Mrs. Yang visited us in New England, we would take them out for a lobster feast and hang out with them in beaches and mountains. When we visit him and Mrs. Yang in China, they would take us to have local delicacies. We really enjoy our times together with good food, laughters, and exchange of ideas and thoughts. Next. Thanks to Fujia, that he helped to make Aurora, which was unknown, known. He was like the wind under our wings, supporting this US small company to journey our journey in the foreign land in China. And most importantly, he encouraged us to do the right thing with the right attitude in pursuit of excellence. And today, we still continue our life journey with such enthusiasm. Next, we are so grateful to have known him, and in sadness, we say goodbye to him last year, but in sincere anticipation, gracefully, we hope to see him again in a better world. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to remember and thank Fujia with you all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Olivia. The comment you made last about pursuit of excellence, Fujia always say that in Chinese, 永远追求卓越. And so this is tremendous. Next, we have Academician Luo Qingming, president of Hainan University, who has known Fujia for a long, long time. Qingming.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Chen. It's my great honor to be here to present in the memory Zoom station for academician Yang Fujia. Fujia is a well-known Chinese nuclear physicist, a great educator, a pioneer in international cooperation education. I learned from him a lot when leading a university or a lab for over 15 years. I got to know him when he was invited to join the International Advisory Board of my lab, Britain Chance Center for Biomedical Photonics. Britain is my postdoc mentor at the University of Pennsylvania. He's also the father of biomedical photonics. Professor Hamilton just mentioned C.C. Yang. I guess it's the same person who was the postdoc of Britain in early 1950s.
Yang Chenzhong.
Hamilton just mentioned C.C. Yang.
Yes, it's Yang Chenzhong.
Yang Fujia. Is that right? Okay. After I came back to China from Japan, I established an institute named after Britain Chance. at Huazhong University of Science and Technology. Under the help of Da Xuan Feng, we established an international advisory board in 2006, consisting of 26 elite members from global academic, industrial, and business spheres, including 3 Nobel laureates. Fujia was invited to the board at that time. When we held the first board meeting in April 2007, Fujia could not participate due to a time conflict. However, he reserved time to visit my lab during his trip to our university in March. After a detailed visit, he wrote 4 characters, 追求卓越, which means the pursuit of excellence, just the same as Olivia mentioned, to inspire my colleagues and students. He told my PhD students, as a PhD student, you have to learn more than your own research field, especially the biomedical photonics is an international field indeed. So when he attended our board meeting for the first time in 2009, he said, I'm here to help the center to become world-class. Actually, just after next year, that's in 2010, we published the first paper in Science.
Oops. Uh-oh, lost Wi-Fi.
Looks like we lost him.
We lost him.
He froze, but I think we still have him.
Well, let's. Oops, where is he? Ah, there he is. Can you hear us? Qingming, you need to unmute.
Okay, does that work? Can you hear me?
That's right. Yes, very well.
All right, I will continue. Okay, Fujia advocated the idea of liberal arts education and promote the reform of higher education in China. Over 10 years later, people started to appreciate and learn from the so-called collegiate system. Now at Hainan University, we started collegiate system reform in 2021 and made promising progress. The Fujia also advocated that university teachers should be given a relaxed environment, adequate funding, and higher salaries to ensure that they can teach and do their studies without worry. So I'm following his guidelines in the governance of my university. Okay, to memorize him, I wrote an article in Chinese in Science and Technology Daily. I've sent that to Da Xuan. Okay, I've shared that article. Okay, Fuxian's philosophy and contributions will be undoubtedly long-lived treasures to the world for today and the future. So it's my honor to make the above comment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, President Luo, for those comments. It makes me remember how we all started to work with you and your vision in establishing the Britain Chance Center, and how Yang Fujia played a critical role in your success in Huazhong University, which now, of course, you're in Hainan University, building your new career. Well, not new anymore. It's almost 4 years. And is transforming Hainan University into a new era. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Don? Okay. Next. This is Academician Yang Fujia in his most favorite setting, having a simple lunch with students from one of the University of Macau's residential colleges. It just shows he loves young people and how he would love to work with and inspire young people. And he always does that. Next slide. Friends from the world, I am both deeply honored and profoundly sad that I'm making this comment about a friend, Yang Fujia, whom I have known since 1979, when we were both at the Niels Bohr Institute in Copenhagen. Some of the content in this comment was lifted from a speech I delivered in honor of his 80th birthday celebrated in Shanghai. My friends, this is not an easy task. First of all, Fujia's lifetime accomplishments, such as his friendship in science, education, he was Fudan's president, he was the first Chinese to assume a chancellorship of Nottingham University and the founding president of Nottingham University, Ningbo. Last but not least, he was one of the developers of China's synchrotron research. For all the above reasons and more, I thought the best way to characterize Fujia is a global intellect. Since no one has up to this point talked about the synchrotron, let me say a few words. He is very interested in synchrotron research. It is clearly a manifestation that in science, Fujia's interest, as already emphasized by Len, are broad and deep, coupled with his vast administrative and highly, here's an important one, non-trivial funding-seeking abilities. As the old saying goes, vision without funding is hallucination. He was able to ensure the construction of a complex experimental facility known as the Shanghai Synchrotron Radiation Facility, we now see erected boldly in Pudong, China, Shanghai. I should also say that Fujia's scientific interest is more intellectual than field-related. I mean, that's already what Len has basically emphasized. In fact, not being involved in any research areas related to synchrotron radiation, he only had a deep and broad interest in how such a facility could enhance human knowledge about materials, both physical and biological. Indeed, before the Pudong facility was created, China only had a rudimentary facility which was piggybacked on the electron-positron collider in the Institute of High Energy Physics in Beijing. Seeing this shortcoming, Fujia, together with his late academician friend Xian Dingchang, clearly inherently felt that if China were to contribute to the important area, in this important area for humanity, it must have a world-class facility. China opened up to the world in 1977, as we all know. Soon after, I had the honor of meeting and knowing him. I dare say that he became my intellectual mentor in the broadest sense of the word. In my memory serves me right, somehow through Academician Wang Zucha of Peking Normal University, I was connected to Fujia almost immediately after China opened up. In the past 42 years, I have had many professional and personal interactions with Fujia. In hindsight, those interactions certainly shaped my career as a scientist and later as a university administrator. For that, I'm deeply, deeply grateful. So today, please let me tell you two such interactions and the lessons I hope some wisdom I and everyone else could derive from them. Next slide. Lesson 1, learn to ask questions, 学问. For the second half of Fujia's career, he became deeply engaged in education reform, especially higher education. This is well-known fact, and there's no need for me to belabor here. As I mentioned, Fujia has a sharp and focused mind. One of his great strengths is that he wastes no words and goes right to the point. He said often in his speeches that students need to 学问, the Chinese phrase for knowledge, which literally means learn to ask. Another characteristic of Fujia is that somehow he is the personification of the amalgamation of East and West. He is perceived by the world to be a global citizen, as so many people said today already. Yet at the same time, one must not be confused that his Chinese heritage, especially his Shanghai heritage, you hear him often say, oozes out of him. He does ask questions, but usually pointedly, but politely. With that, he always gets the right answer. The best example of the above characteristic of Fujia was in 1993, when the then Israeli Prime Minister, the late Isaac Rabin, visited Fudan University. There was a famous dialogue between Rabin and Fujia. Fujia said, "Your Excellency, it is well known that your country does not possess a drop of fossil fuel underneath the land. How could your country become the breadbasket and high technology center of the Middle East?" Without the slightest hesitation, Rabin answered, "Oh, because we have 7 world-class universities." The dialogue tells me 2 things about Fujia. First, whenever he meets someone for the first time, he always does his homework about the person a priori. Clearly, in order to receive Rabin, Fujia did enough homework about Israel. Second, Fujia is very comfortable with foreigners, and in return, foreigners are very comfortable with him. He is even comfortable with foreign dignitaries such as Rabin. Only possessing sufficient comfort level was he able to ask what may appear to be an impolite question without being impolite. In hindsight, by asking a very good and penetrating question, Fujia actually extracted a great answer from Rabin, whose implications was clearly not just as important to China as it was to Israel. My friends, one cannot help but be impressed by Rabin's quick answer. However, wouldn't you not agree with me that if it were not because Fujia asked the right question and thus set the stage for Rabin, would we get such a succinct answer about the fundamental importance of higher education? It is often we hear people saying, so-and-so gave a great answer. What we hear less often, in fact, almost never, is that was a great question. Indeed, Fujia asked a great question, or 学问, or knowledge, ask question. From the Rabin-Yang dialogue, when Yang set the stage by asking such a question, the answer of Rabin, great as it was really the only one he could give. I think there is no doubt in my mind that the question by Fujia was clearly just as, if not more important than the answer by Rabin. Lesson 2, next slide. Public policies. In 1972, as a young and naive assistant professor of physics, launching my career in nuclear physics at Drexel University, I went to Niels Bohr Institute in the University of Copenhagen. There I met Fujia and his wife, teacher Peng Laoshi, in person for the first time. Of course, as many of you know, to be able to have one spouse joining the trip at that point in time in China was something truly unusual. That alone tells me Fujia was a man of unusual character. As all of you know, from 1966 to 1976, China suffered through 10 horrific years of cultural revolution. In 1978, there was a global, well-publicized conference held in Beijing, whose name was National Reconstruction Through Science. As a young physicist, the Beijing Conference of 1978 greatly attracted my intellectual curiosity and excitement. I should preamble this by letting you know that prior to 1972, the year I received my PhD in theoretical physics from the University of Minnesota, Chinese physicists was for me essentially a blur, if not a black hole. From 1972 and 1974, I was a postdoctoral fellow at the Department of Theoretical Physics of the University of Manchester. It was there that I first saw in the department's library a subscription to the Acta Physica Sinica 物理学报, the Chinese physics journal. Something I did not know that even existed. Only by reading the journal that I came to the realization that physics was not only existed in China, it was actually quite prominent. Therefore, when China opened up in 1977, I literally experienced a breath of mental fresh air, and I became even more eager to deepen my understanding of China and Chinese science. For the above reason, you could imagine my excitement I had when my host at the Niels Bohr Institute informed me prior to my arrival that there will be a group of Chinese scientists sent from China in the Bohr Institute. Next slide. The person who was heading the Chinese visit logistics, probably next slide, did not know that the members of the group. She wanted me to be assistance in case these visitors have language difficulties. As it turns out, all the visitors were fluent in English. In fact, one of them, Academician Xian Dingchang, who was actually fluent in Russian as well. I became lifetime friends with all of them, with Fujia and teacher Peng, and so on. The Bohr Institute, the mecca of nuclear physics, was, and I'm sure it still is, a place where scientists from all corners of the world would encourage to and was platformed to discuss specific scientific issues without any sense of professional authority. I recall one important short conversation over lunch at the Bohr Institute I had with Fujia. That conversation literally shaped my thinking about higher education and many decades later. As I mentioned earlier, I was very interested in 1978 Beijing's conference. So I remember my conversation with Fujia was the following. Professor Yang, it is so exciting to hear about the Chinese Science Conference in Beijing last year. The science will play a role in China's reconstruction. I remember I specifically left out the phrase, the Great Cultural Revolution, because I was not sure whether it was okay to mention that term to someone who just came from China. His answer startled me. In what I learned later on was his style of conversation, direct and to the point. He said, science cannot rebuild China. Proper public policies can rebuild China, he concluded. My friends, you can imagine that I was quite taken aback by such a terse answer. It was not at all what I expected. Frankly, I was expecting Yang Fujia to agree with me about a Chinese national excitement of the spring of Chinese science. Mind you, at that moment, the term public policies, 公共政策, was not even in the Chinese or English vocabulary. I had no follow-up to that answer, and therefore the discussion was dropped. Fast forward to 1997. At that time, I was involved working with a United States congressman named Kirk Weldon on various technical projects. Weldon was then the congressman from my home district in the suburbs of Philadelphia. As we became more familiar with one another, Weldon and I had many conversations on a variety of subjects. I remember Weldon said to me one day something of the following. You know, Dashuan, politics is public policy's personification. When the United States Congress makes laws or rulings, hopefully we de facto are instituting public policies for social good and that the society must obey. Of course, such policies, public policies, are the results of ethical, humane, and culminating social and political habits. When Weldon said that, I recall at that moment, I suddenly remembered that 2 decades ago, the term public policies was uttered by Fujia. It suddenly dawned on me what Fujia meant. He was telling me that for China to make progress, the nation must institute public policies which fit the social and political habits of the nation. As Weldon said, public policies must be a result of deep understanding of the social and political habits and must be beneficial to the nation at large. So it dawned on me right then and there, 20 years after Fujia said to me in Copenhagen, that for national reconstruction, public policies are the reasons and science is simply a tool. To put science before public policies is de facto putting the cart before the horse. My friends, nearly all global challenges humanity is facing today, human hatred, geopolitical uncertainties, energy challenges, climate changes, population explosion, and so on and so forth, are the results of poor public policies for the past century or centuries. It also dawned on me that today higher education globally, and for sure in Asia Pacific in general, may be missing the boat by not creating a public policy ambience for our faculty and students in many aspiring higher education institutions. This was indeed a fundamental, a profound lesson. Slowly as it was, I learned from Fujia. It literally altered my thinking about higher education in the past 3 and 4 decades. The two examples, next slide. The 2 examples I had written the following. In another context, I wrote the following. In 1976 was a defining year for modern China. Chairman Mao died on September 9th that year, followed immediately by the spectacular collapse of the so-called Gang of Four, thus bringing closure to 10 painful years of cultural revolution and ushered China into a new era. Someday historians will undoubtedly consider the new era as the miracle of the 20th century, the world in the 20th century. In 1976, after a year of utter devastation, China was at the verge of a complete meltdown economically, technologically, and intellectually. Having quarter humanity and a land size spanning nearly half of Asia, such a meltdown would have horrifying global implications. Yet, no meltdown occurred. A fundamental reason why there was no meltdown was because of the Herculean contributions of the tens of millions of Chinese intellectuals in their darkest hours during the era, and during the hardest and hardships, and suffering the deepest personal humiliations. They always maintained palpable hope for themselves, their family, their professions, and their nation. Indeed, even without personal liberty, both physical and mentally, they remain important pillars of the nation, holding up its dignity. As the successes of China of the 21st century is in no small part due to this group of individuals. There's no question in my mind that Fujia is one of the pillars I mentioned in this writing. So in summary, as we remember Fujia's life and his contributions to humanity, we must ensure what he has achieved should not and must not be fade away in time. This is not just for Fujia as a person, for Fujia as a Chinese global intellect, but in general, in these hours of great humanity needs. Thank you. Well, I think we are almost at the end of our event today. So I will ask Joe whether he would, oh, before I do that, is there anyone in the list that would like to say a few words about today's remembrance? If you do, please send a message to the chat and we will identify you immediately. If not, I will ask Joe to provide a summary of today's event. Joe?
Thank you. I do want to thank everyone who's participated in this Zoom meeting to honor our longtime friend and colleague, Academician Yang Fujia, a great intellect, scientifically, educationally, and in my remembrances for opening up China's science to the West and the West to Chinese science. Those are marvelous contributions that will always be remembered in history. I do want to add a few personal comments myself, since some of you have added personal comments. Mainly through Professor Yang, I visited China for over 6 months in total during my many trips to China, which he organized. On one of those trips, Lynn Feldman indicated his interest in and support of condensed matter physics. By 1995, nuclear physics had become so well known in the world that the 1995 every 3-year conference that was held internationally, visiting from one country to the next, that conference was held in China, with Yang Fujia being a primary emphasis on getting it to China in 1995, and of their invitation of me to be the preliminary session speaker on nuclear structure research in the world, summarizing the last 3 years. I also want to thank Professor Yang Fujia and the former director of the Lanzhou Modern Physics Institute for nominating me to become the second American to receive the International Scientific and Technological Award of China given by the President of China. And finally, the influence that all of the Chinese have had on my own personal career in research, not only the 10 PhDs who came and worked with me, but the 10 PhDs who worked with my colleague, Professor Zhu at Tsinghua, using data that we took together in the US and went back to China with to help students do their PhD thesis in China. So in fact, we influenced some 20 PhD students, Chinese students in nuclear physics on that score. So I close this by again saying thank you to everyone who has participated. It is with great sadness that we have hosted this meeting in the loss of our longtime friend and dear colleague, Professor Yang Fujia. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me go around once more. Anyone else who want to say anything? I see that my good friend Y.S. Liu is there. Do you want to say something?
Well, Daxuan, thank you for inviting me to participate in this really very well organized.
Well, first of all, Y.S. Liu is one of the top lead scientists in Taiwan.
Oh, okay. Thanks for organizing this really well, very well meeting in memory of Yang Fujia. In fact, I didn't meet Yang Fujia, except, learn most of the things from my good old friend, Da Xuan. And I did visit once about this Nottingham Ningbo University. And I was so impressed, and I really wish there are more such college and educational institute in China. So I want to thank all of you for helping me to better know Fujia Yang, and I wish everyone healthy and happy. Thank you.
Great, thank you, YS. Anyone else want to say something before we end? Well, if not, then I would want to thank everyone today. Oh, there's someone from ITP who's on there. You would like to say something? Zhou Shangui.
Yeah, this is Shangui Zhou from the Institute of Theoretical Physics, Chinese Academy of Sciences in Beijing. I'm traveling, and may I say something, Professor Feng?
Please.
Yeah. I'm working on nuclear theory. Actually, Joe, I have attended the conferences several years ago you organized in the United States. And I think I'm old enough and also young enough to have the pleasure to learn my university course of atomic physics by using the textbook written by Professor Fujia Yang. And this is the first thing I'd like to mention. And that textbook impressed me very much. On the one hand, it certainly contained a lot of useful knowledge and information. And on the other hand, there are also some new way to encourage, to inspire us by telling a lot of how to communicate, how to inspire new ideas and in that textbook. And this is the first thing I want to mention. Actually, I used that textbook in, I think, late 1980s. And that textbook of atomic physics was published at that time for the first version. And now I think it's published already for the third or the fourth version edition. That's a very important textbook. This is the first thing I'd like to mention. And the second thing is certainly I learned a lot from the book he and his colleagues in Fudan University written. The title is simply Nuclear Physics, 原子核物理 in Chinese. And this is also a very good book. And the third thing I think I learned from Professor Yang is I did some survey of the Chinese articles published in 1970s, 80s for certainly in Chinese. One of them was a summary of his attendance of the International Nuclear Physics Conference, something like that. And that was a very good summary. And I learned a lot from that summary article. And one particular thing I'd like to mention is just the study of super heavy nuclei, which I am still working on. And Joe, you are also a very excellent expert on that, I know. And I have not many personal contacts with Professor Yang, but my last meeting with him was in 2018. That was the celebration of Fudan University, the Institute of Modern Physics, 50 years anniversary, something like that. And he attended shortly the celebration and gave a speech, encouraged us to continue nuclear physics, nuclear technology, and to do more to promote science in China. So I was encouraged a lot. And again, I'd like to thank you very much, Joe and Daxuan, for organizing this excellent remembering meeting. And thank you very much.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more person to make comments. Anyone? Don't be shy. Going around.
I do want to say one thing, Daxuan.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank Don Prickett from Vanderbilt for all of his help in organizing and getting all of the talks lined up so that we could move smoothly through all the presentations that were taking place. Thank you very much, Don.
Yes, thank you very much, Don.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Sun Yongyan, do you want to say something at the end, since you're the son-in-law and you represent the family?
I just want to thank all the participants and bring us a very nice remembrance of my father-in-law, Fujia Yang. I want to show my appreciation of the organizers, Dr. Feng and Hamilton. Thank you.
Okay, friends, good things have to come to an end. I want to thank everyone for attending today. I'm sort of sad that we have to have this meeting, but at the same time exhilarated that we did meet because of Yang Fujia. Once again, Yang Fujia did, even when he's no longer on this life, on this earth, he's able to bring us together, which I don't think we will be able to do so easily if he's not gone. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.